Okay, so this is a video on historical context of Russell's paradox and how it shaped mathematics. Um, let's jump right to it. Okay, so all this was happening around the turn of, not the last century, but one before it. So at the beginning of 20th century, so that's around the year 1900 Common Era. Um, that was around the time where mathematicians were trying to come together and unify the subject. So before this time, there were lots of mathematics being done, but with different level of standards and with different set of rules in different parts of the world and different parts of the subjects. So some were strict, but some were a little bit more loose in terms of rules on what you can do and what you're not allowed to do. And there were a couple of points where mathematicians proved some theorems and later noticed that it was incorrect. And there wasn't any mistakes on the proof. The mistakes was other theorems that was used within the proof. So they had to go peel back a couple of layers before they could find a mistake. And because the rules were loose, it was unclear like if there are more errors out there and whether or not the theorem that somebody proved is actually correct because maybe it was using standards that wasn't strict enough and so on. So this was obviously a problem. So there were a lot of mathematicians getting together and saying, hey, we need to codify what it means to be the subject of mathematics. So put all the ground rules, and these are what's called axioms. And they wanted to axiomatize all of mathematics into well-defined set of rules that everybody agreed on and they would follow. Okay, so Bertrand Russell and Alfred Whitehead, they teamed up together to tackle this task. So they published 3 volumes of what's called Principia Mathematica. It came in 3 volumes. So the first volume was published in 1910, then 1912, and 1930. There were a lot of typos though, so there are second editions and so on. But yeah, over the 2 decades, they try to rebuild mathematics from ground up. It is listed as 23rd on top 100 nonfiction books of all time. But it's not the greatest book in the world. To see what I mean by this, let's actually look at the book itself. So let's see. Okay. So if you Google Principia Mathematica and archive, you can get this website where you can actually look into the book for free. You can flip pages, but let's get to middle of the book. This is what the book looks like. It's just like garbage full of symbols. It's really difficult to read. Look at that. This is not something you can read and okay, I understand what the theorem and the proof is saying. It just looks like one of those error printing when the printer kind of starts spitting out random garbage sequence of symbols. That's what it looks like. And it's over 700 pages of this junk. So in order for them to set it to the ground rules, like it became into this like combination of symbols and rules on how to modify these symbols to make new symbols. It's really unreadable. So they were trying to accomplish two things. So they wanted to show consistency of mathematics. So they were really worried that there could be some kind of paradox within the mathematical system. So consistency in this case means there's no contradictions within the rule. That's what consistency means in logic. And not only that, they also wanted to show the completeness of mathematics. In this case, complete set of logic system means everything that is true is somehow provable. So every true statement has a proof. So you wanted a system that did not contradict itself, and you also want a system that can prove everything that you could state. So those were what they wanted to accomplish. So take away from this. So there are a couple good things and a couple things that are lessons that we learned from it. One thing that you could conclude from this, so they were in general successful in reducing mathematics to symbols and rules on manipulating symbols. So you saw the first volume of the book with lots of symbols all over the pages. So they were able to reduce mathematics as we know it today. They formulated slightly different than the way we do in modern mathematics, but they virtually said done the same work. So mathematics could be reduced into strings of symbols and rules for how to manipulate those symbols. And that kind of sets the groundwork for idea of computers. So you might have, I already made the analogy of like some kind of printer output where there's a computer error, but really if you look at like how software runs in your computer, it resolves to strings of instructions that are kind of might look like garbage to a human reader. So this type of mathematics or logic was necessary in order for people to come up with the idea of some kind of universal computing machine. So this is before the time of actual computers, but like 1 decade after this work, the idea of computers were invented by Alan Turing. So this kind of work had to be done before Turing could accomplish their idea. And another takeaway, this is a kind of negative one, but he made it clear that mathematics can't be really learned from this kind of symbolic output. So he taught mathematicians that actually, if you want to learn and communicate mathematics between like human mathematicians, not a computer one, then we should use everyday language. But we could use symbols if you want to be precise about what you exactly mean in certain contexts. But otherwise, idea is better communicated using language like English, for example. Okay. And I gotta say, Russell and Whitehead could not achieve the two goals that were stated earlier about consistency of mathematics, that it doesn't contain any contradictions, or completeness of mathematics. That's what they were shooting for, but they couldn't get there. Actually, that work was necessary, I think, because Gödel kind of built on top of their idea. And in 1931, Gödel was able to prove two theorems, Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And he basically said these two things. If a logical system is consistent, then it cannot be complete. So, so I'm kind of hiding a little bit of details, but if your logical system contains like arithmetic and integers, and it does not contain any contradictions, then there's necessarily some theorems that it is not able to prove. So it is actually impossible to have a system that could prove all true statements. That was one piece of it. So that acts as the completeness of mathematics. It's actually impossible. You can't prove everything that's true. So there are some true things that you can't prove. And not only that, if you have a system that's developed enough to handle integers and arithmetic, those consistency of axioms cannot be proved within its own system. So you can't prove within itself that it has no contradiction in itself. So even that was impossible to show. So that kind of it's kind of a negative result, but it's impossible to show that this logical system does not have any contradictions. It probably doesn't. It hasn't been found in over 100 years. If there was a way to get contradiction, then it has to be a very complex way of getting there. And we have to be okay with this slightly uncomfortable fact that sometimes you can't prove everything. So there are some statements that you can't prove. But I think on the other hand, that makes mathematics interesting as well. So you have some statements that you might not be able to prove, but you kind of try at it. So there's a little bit of mystery on what you can prove and what you can't. Keeps mathematicians like me have a job, I think. Okay, so that is it. But I wanted to say a little bit about the first incompleteness theorem, where if system is consistent, it can't be complete. So there are some true statements that does not have proof, but how do you prove the fact that there are some true statements that you can't prove? And the way Gödel went about it is actually very clever. And it's kind of, it has that idea of this Lié's paradox-like argument inside of it. Basically, he was able to turn this into a mathematical statement. So he was able to make a statement inside of mathematics that said something like, this statement is unprovable. So this statement does not have any proof. It's basically what Gödel was able to create inside of the system. This is referred to as Gödel's sentence. And I say a sentence, but really he was able to encode this idea into like a polynomial and whether this polynomial is equal to 0 or not. So it's completely mathematical idea backed up by numbers, but the idea is something that you could understand, right? So this statement has no proof within the system. So think about this. If this was provable, then the system is inconsistent, because if you were able to prove the fact that this statement has no proof, then the statement has a proof and it's also doesn't have a proof. So it's kind of like a liar's paradox. This will become a contradiction. But if the system is consistent, that means this statement really doesn't have proof. So it is true, the statement has no proof. So it's incomplete, right? It's a true statement that doesn't have no proof. I hope that made sense. So Goro used this idea of self-reference to prove a theorem like this. It is really mind-blowing that he was able to do this. Anyways, that's it for the historical context of Russell's paradox. It was really interesting period, I think, for mathematics. Okay, so this is it for the logic section. I think Wednesday next week, we'll have kind of a recap video of like things that we covered in the logic unit. And on Friday, we'll have a quiz based on everything we learned in the logic unit. So look forward to that. And after that, we're going to be starting to learn about probability and some probability paradoxes. So I'm pretty excited about that because probability is my specialty and there's a lot of fun stuff there. Anyways, I'll end the video here. I'll see you next week.